Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. We're going to be doing another weekly round of meta-analysis for PvP, which specializations are looking strong and healthy, which specializations are starting to wither and disintegrate into nothing as the season progresses. We have the Mythic Dungeon International starting here this weekend, so it's kind of my anticipation that they're probably going to hold off on changes until at least they see what's going on in the MDI, and if they're happy with what's going there. And then if they're not, there's probably going to be a very big volume of changes, and I would likely think that there will be some PvP ones snuck in there as well, because I would think they want to get those in before the AWC finals. But I also think it's important that they get some changes in pretty soon for the ladder, because there are definitely some specializations that I think are struggling that are going to be highlighted in this video, looking at some metrics that can actually determine whether or not your specialization is struggling in the current meta. And if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash that subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. So I'm using this data from the Drustvar website. It basically tracks the popularity and the win rate of all the specializations, and you can track them in any bracket. We're going to be predominantly looking at solo shuffle. We can also look at the different range of ratings as well, from beginner rating to expert rating, and we can obviously look at melee, ranged, and healers, and we're going to be looking at all of that to see what is going on. So you can see the graph is not 100% accurate. It's got a couple of bugs in it. These jumps where like everything drops to zero, I don't think that's real. I think that's just a glitch. I would just anticipate that to be a very similar trend. You can obviously see that Ret Paladin is kind of the glowing all-star right now, and this is the glowing all-star in pretty much all content of the game: Battleground Blitz, Solo Shuffle, basically anything in the game. This is a one-size-fits-all specialization at the moment, so if you're really just looking for something that you want to try and get some of the PvP rewards on, that's really powerful 1v1, really powerful in arenas and battlegrounds, I think Ret Paladin is obviously the go-to for that, and it's also really simple and easy to pick up. So it's just like everything coming together for this specialization to just be the perfect storm for like the best ladder spec to be playing at the moment. But it's also good to look at their win rate. So for example, at the lower ratings, 1500 to 1800, it's holding it above a 50% win ratio, which is a healthy margin. And if we, as you move through the ranks, it gets just higher and higher on its win rate. Basically, it looks like at the moment from 1800 to 2100, we see it fall off a little bit or non-existent. Oh, it's because the graph is bugged out here. So its win rate is still 53%. It's a bit annoying that the data bugged out here for that specific rating threshold on that week, but it looks like at the highest rating it's not. It gets even higher. So basically, you start out at a solid win rate even at the lowest parts of the ladder, and you get to this is an erroneously high win rate. 63%. That's a very high win rate for how many games of Ret Paladin that is being played at the moment. Yeah, Ret Paladin. This is the best spec to pick up any content in the game, in any skill level. You're going to progress and likely see a tremendous amount of success with it. Now, Havoc Demon Hunter is actually trending a little bit upwards, which I find a little bit surprising here, but it's coming in as actually the second highest played specialization, and the lowest win rates, 51 is up to 53. That's a pretty substantial increase in win rate. Now, Demon Hunter's win rate might be correlated with the fact that when Rets are good, Rogues are bad, and if Rogues are bad, Demon Hunters are good. So we might be seeing that type of shift. Now, Demon Hunter does start to fall off more as you get to higher rating, as it is no longer in the number 2 position, a little bit higher up, and its win rate starts to go down though. So this is a spec that maybe you'll see some success earlier on in the earlier stages of the ladder, but likely as you start to climb, there might be a little bit more of an uptick of things that are difficult for you, like Rogues. And I think that does ultimately make a lot of sense. But its win rate towards the medium high level is still substantially over 50%. Which is more than a healthy margin. And then at 2400 rating plus, it jumps to 63% win rate, although it was below 50. So there's definitely some hit and miss with Demon Hunter. It's likely a situation where you might be countered depending on the specs in the lobby as you climb, whereas Ret is not as easily countered anymore. I think it has tools now to actually combat multiple casters. The fact that it is more ranged than it was previously are giving it a lot more favor and a lot more advantages that Demon Hunter doesn't really have. Demon Hunter still does have clear weaknesses, but it has clear strengths as well. And depending on how things move forward, right, if other classes get buffed, Demon Hunter could definitely get a lot better. Something like Warlock, Demon Hunter is really good into. It's not really popular at the moment, not really strong at the moment. So Demon Hunter is definitely a solid pick, I would say, overall. Fury Warrior, which was surprisingly tied with Demon Hunter, is still 50% win rate even for beginners, which is great. As you progress through all of the ranks, it gets higher and higher, above 53% at 1800 to 2100. It becomes the number one spec towards the higher ratings, but still holding solidly above a 50% win rate. And then when you get to 2400 plus, it looks like it falls off a little bit more, but it might have also just been bugged. So it's still above 50% win rate, even above 2400. But I think much like Demon Hunter, it has counters. You know, hunters and mages are notoriously going to be some of the most difficult things. Even elemental shamans to some degree are going to be the most difficult things for you as a Fury Warrior. So I think that's the reason why Ret is kind of this cut above, is that it just doesn't have any like blaring weakness other than maybe an Arcane Mage, which again is so niche that you're really not going to encounter it that much. Whereas Frost Mages and Hunters, they're very popular. You're going to see them a lot as warriors. Arms Warrior, which is a spec that people are constantly asking me about, like, is Arms better than Fury? Well, now we're going to get to see, right? So at the very low rating, it's still above a 50% win rate, although it is definitely towards the bottom of overall popularity at lower ratings. But as we climb to more of the middle ranks, it's still at the bottom, but it's still above a 50% win rate, which is a healthy margin. Much like Fury, it's got the same types of weaknesses. It starts to climb the ranks a little bit more, but its win rate starts falling off a lot here. Now it's below 50% win rate. So Arms Warrior is definitely in a position where it's got something that it's struggling with. I think it's more or less the things that counter it. As we get to the absolute top of the ladder, tippy top of the ladder, it does slightly bounce back. So this is kind of it's going to be a volatile spec, likely, based on the data that I'm observing here for Arms Warrior. It's going to feel more volatile. You're going to have hit and miss lobbies where you might feel like a god sometimes, then feel completely useless and unable to move in other situations. So definitely, it's still good, obviously, because I don't think it would be trending this high otherwise, but it's definitely got some weaknesses that can be taken advantage of. Feral Druid, which is still trending towards the middle, even at the beginning rating, which is surprising, because to me, Feral Druid is an advanced specialization. It's a lot more complicated, a lot more nuance to it than the kind of rock'em sock'em robot melee DPS specs, but it's still trending pretty high here in the middle, even despite that. Holds above a 50% win rate, but it has fallen a little bit at the lower ratings, which I think does make sense at the lower ratings, not knowing when to bear form, things like that. Definitely going to be more punishing. Holds still solidly in the mid here with above 50% win rate. Still a really healthy pick. 2100 to 2400. Feral Druid's even higher win rate. So obviously the better you get, and I have to sneeze, the better you get at knowing when to go bear form, how to play defensive position and get clones, you can increase your win rate the higher rating that you get. So seems like a decent spec for somebody who's a beginner, although it might be a little bit more punishing than other specs. Although when we get to the absolute top, its win rate gets absolutely slaughtered. I don't know what that is. This has to be, there must only be one Feral Druid above 2400, and he had like a really bad lobby or something like that. Or the data might be broken here, but this is obviously a very big drop off. This makes me think there's literally one Druid above 2400 right now, and he just got absolutely slaughtered. Because obviously you can see some data is broken, right? It didn't go from 66 to 0. So some of this is skewed, but I think Feral Druid definitely still holds as a solid pick, but it's obviously more complex, so it depends on what your goals are in the game if you want that level of challenge. Subtlety Rogue, which is typically a very bottom low representation, got reworked this patch. It got a lot of its cheese mechanics removed, tried to make it a little bit more straightforward. It's holding solid at a 7.2 popularity rate, which is, I would say, very high for a rogue specialization. And its win rate, even at low ratings, is still above 50%, which I think that's a very healthy margin considering how difficult the spec is to play as a beginner. At 1800 rating, it does start to fall a little bit. Actually, it stays in about the same spot. It's still solidly above a 50% win rate. 2100 to 2400. For Subtlety Rogue, it's still above 50% win rate, although its popularity falls a little bit more, but not by much. And then at the absolute highest parts of the ladder, Subtlety Rogue, again, I don't know how accurate this data is, going from 46 to 66. Could have just been the one Rogue above 2400 had a really good week, so their win rate suddenly jumped up above 66% here for them. But it seems like Subtlety Rogue is actually a good ride, and honestly, I need to level my Rogue because I want to give that a go. Honestly, I haven't made my Rogue yet. It's the only class I don't have. I've done 2400 solo shuffle challenges on a lot of specs now for this season. I want to say like close to 10 at least, maybe more. But Rogue is actually intriguing me. The fact that it's actually holding so healthily at this point, because usually it's all the Rogue specs are down here. Assassination is also a close second for that. So a decent pick at low ratings, still above a 50% win rate at 1800 rating. Still holding above 50% win rate, just looking healthy. I would say that Assassination Rogue plays a little bit more like a warrior than Subtlety Rogue. So if you're like transitioning from a warrior or a rep paladin or something, assassination is probably gonna be an easier transition. Win rate went up a lot, even towards the higher ratings for assassination. At 2400 plus for assassination, we do see a drop off. Although wait, it was 100% win rate before. Okay, so this is just one rogue above 2400. So some of these specs at the highest rating, obviously the data is a lot more skewed because there's not a lot of players at that bracket. So if there's only two rogues that played at the highest level of the ladder, they had a bad lobby, it's going to impact the entire win rate. But it seems like assassination is in a healthy position regardless of skill level, or bracket range. So definitely a solid pickup if you wanted to go for that. Frost Death Knight still kind of hovering towards the middle here. It seems like Unholy and Frost, they're doing slightly better. I feel like they were a lot lower than this. But obviously, I think it's defense for Frost DK and Unholy DK, especially against physical damage. They hold a 50% win rate, even at the lowest bracket, which is nice. I think Death Knight survivability is something I would like to see increase, especially aimed at physical damage. But the win rate is still holding strong here, above 50%, even throughout all of the ranks for Frost Death Knight, which is awesome. Above 55%, even towards the top end of the ladder to 2400. Again, a lot of these specs, we don't see any rogues or Frost DKs about 2400, which is telling of its potential at the absolute high end of the game is going to be more limited, but definitely towards the beginning and medium level, it seems like you can still make it work. Obviously, when you get to the top level, you're going to be getting a lot of Windwalkers, a lot of Fury Warriors, things that are very difficult to survive against, which is why Death Knight is something I would love to see changes for. Focused on increasing their physical durability against warriors and windwalkers. I think they still have okay survivability against casters with anti-magic zone and anti-magic shield, but it's definitely physical. And maybe even, I don't know, there are ways to abuse things like Chains of Ice and just run away constantly, but I feel like Frost DK has fallen back into that feast famine where it just one-shots or does nothing, which is not what I think they were aiming for specializations. So aiming to take damage out of their cooldowns, put it more into their sustain, I think would be healthy for them overall. Windwalker holding still strong in the mid here, although it seems like that's quite a fall off from where it was before. But even at beginner ratings, Windwalker is a little bit more complicated than the other melee. You can't just kind of press your buttons willy-nilly and press the same thing in multiple times and still do maximum damage from my experience playing it, but I had a lot of fun with it. Now, as you start to climb with it, though, it's a little lower at the beginning levels, but as you start to learn to play it, you can see its popularity begins increasing dramatically. And maybe we'll just avoid the 2400 bracket as far as win rate, because obviously there's not a lot of players, but it jumped up above 50% win rate. So obviously, ideally, all these classes would be 50%. If the game is like 100% perfectly balanced, every stat for win rate would just be 50% across the board for every single spec, which means you're in a really good spot. Windwalker's in a really good spot. Still has some weaknesses. I'd say its weaknesses maybe are slightly different than Warrior, but it still has similar weaknesses. So that's why we see it trending in the middle. Honestly, that's the trade-off here between all of this, is that a lot of these specs in the middle have significant weaknesses. Rep Paladin doesn't have any weaknesses anymore. It seems like it's just a solid pick into pretty much everything, and that's kind of thing. This is how they could choose to balance the game. Is either everything is homogenized, so everything has access to the same tools, so it's just how you perform, but everything's homogenized, or you have rock paper scissors meta where warriors counter warlocks, but warlocks counter mages, but mages counter warriors, so that it's kind of like this flowing food chain type of meta. And WoW PvP has historically been balanced around the food chain. And usually what you can do is pick up partners that play classes that help you. So, for example, warriors struggle against mages. So if they play with shamans are good into mages. Now they can pair up that weakness and turn it into possibly a strength and even that out a little bit. The combination of the specs help even out the volatility of the rock, paper, scissors meta. But where you see issues generally for WoW is when survivability is way too high on a specialization. I wouldn't say that's necessarily the case for Rep Paladin right now. It's just that it doesn't have a rock, paper, scissors clear weakness, except Arcane. I do think Arcane Mage is a clear weakness for it, but Arcane is so niche that it's just there's not enough specs in that archetype of rock, paper, scissors for it to really be noticeable on the ladder at this time. But Unholy DK, another one, I think it's obvious that the physical damage reduction should be buffed on this specialization. It still does, though, hold above a 50% win rate. I think I'm going to play some Unholy DK actually on my stream today. If you want to follow along with that, it's in my description down below, because I want to give it a go and see what's going on with the damage buffs that I got through. It's honestly holding decently well, still above a 50% win rate. But obviously, I've seen lobbies, I've played a lot, and I've seen where the DKs just get absolutely rammed by melee DPS, and there's really not a tremendous amount you can do, but its win rate is surprisingly still holding solid. And obviously this is probably like the 2 or 3 Unholy DKs that just always play Unholy DK that are padding up the numbers towards the top portion of this ladder. So maybe the bottom portion is a bit more accurate for the data when you're looking at a spec like this, where it's only a handful of players playing it at the medium to high level of skill. But I think Unholy DK is okay. I think it's just one little tweak away from being a really just solid specialization between Frost and Unholy, although Frost might need a little bit more work with its damage profile. Survival Hunter is still not a popular specialization, but I think that it doesn't mean that it's not strong. Obviously Beastmastery and Marksman I think are tough to compete with. It still does hold above 50% win rate even at the beginning stages of the ladder. As you advance through the ladder, its popularity increases slightly. Its win rate starts falling, though. So maybe it is actually weaker. I mean, it's got the same weaknesses that Warrior, I would say, has, getting kited around, and its damage is a little bit harder to pull off. Yeah, its win rate starts falling off a lot. I'm totally off base with Survival. It looks like Survival Hunter is looking like this is going to be a struggle bus until you get to be the absolute best Survival Hunter. The one Survival Hunter is 2,400. So once you're playing it at skill cap, you can get a decently strong win rate. But this seems like a spec if you're completely new to the game that you're probably better off playing Beast Mastery or Marksmanship Hunter if you're worried about that kind of initial success barrier and not wanting to lose a lot immediately. So Survival, I'm trying to think of what exactly they could do about it to help it out other than giving it more ranged disruption, right? Like your stun's a very long cooldown. Interrupt's not a long duration given its limitations. You have to use a lot of your mobility to land your crowd control, and then you don't have mobility to connect to your target, although you do have a decent balance of melee and ranged attacks, unlike a lot of other melee that don't have access to that type of stuff. So it could just be that Beast Mastery is overtuned. The pack leader obviously is doing a tremendous amount of damage on Beast Mastery, or you summon in the boars that proc and do a bunch of extra damage. So it might just be that Beast Mastery and Marksman are shining a little bit brighter, but definitely there's something about the kit I think that is more exploitable than Beast Mastery for sure, because Marksman does have some clear weaknesses. Enhancement Shaman's falling a lot. Outlaw Rogue is holding out towards the bottom here as well. Still a surprising win rate, jumped over 50% at the lowest rating. I was really expecting Outlaw Rogue to have a terrible win rate at the lowest rating because it's a very difficult spec to actually pull off. This is more accurate. This is more what I was thinking. It's going to drop below 50% at the low end of the ladder, but then as we get towards the top end of the ladder, that its win rate would likely pick up would be kind of my expectation. And it does. It jumps back up to 55%. So Outlaw Rogue is one where you've got to put in the time before you're really going to see the payout for it, but I do think it is substantially weaker. I think most notably its defense has come down a lot from the changes that they made in the most recent PvP changes, and with those survivability reductions that these classes that are just doing monstrous amounts of damage and mowing you over can kind of just crunch you before you start getting a lot of momentum. But it has a ton of control, so I do think in the hands of like absolute best player, sure, but it's, again, why would you want to try so hard if you could just do it as Ret? Is likely the debate that you're going to be making for yourself mentally whenever you're thinking about this. And then Enhancement Shaman, which has fallen to the lowest one. Sad day to be an Enhancement Shaman, and I don't know why I have to sneeze so much, but towards the low end of the rating threshold, still a 50% win rate, which is not awful. When we get to 1800 to 2099, it does start to pick up a little bit, right? It jumps up a little bit here, and its win rate also to 56%. So it's in an okay spot, and then but when we get to the top end of the ladder, its win rate starts getting obliterated, unfortunately. So, and I know there's a lot of shamans that have like a ton of alts up here. A little bit healthier if you're literally the tippiest top Enhancement Shaman, but if you're kind of just like a beginner medium level player, you might struggle more with the specialization. But if you persevere, it's obvious that there is potential for it. I think unlike Red, it's like you just don't have a lot of good ranged damage. Honestly, I feel like Enhance could maybe use the rework that Ret got with bringing ability count down, making it kind of like this hybrid melee ranged spec, and that's the trade-off for not having Mortal Strike, to make it a little bit more accessible. And then it's basically filling the same niche as Ret. It's just instead of defense utility, it's focused on offense utility, like Wind Shear and Grounding Totem. Could be a nice way, but that's something that's going to require a lot more attention than like a class tuning patch, right? I mean, you could obviously just buff all of its damage and it would likely become a lot stronger, and maybe that's what you should do in the short term, but in the long term it's going to take a lot more to be able to work that through. For ranged, I don't think it's surprising. Frost Mage is still riding through, and I just started my Frost Mage, got 2200 in one day. The spec is really good. It's disgustingly good. A lot of your damage can be performed just through instant casts. You're very durable. Overpowered barrier reflecting damage is really strong. Your snares against melee, with how popular they are, far just the best hard counter, so you're countering the large majority of what people are playing, it's probably one of the best specs that you can play. I think this is going to hold true likely of any rating threshold. As we jump from beginner to advanced, you can see that the data is still above 50%, although towards the higher end, it looks like Ellie Shaman does start to take over. I could definitely see that. From my experience, Ellie Shaman lobbies were probably the most difficult. It actually falls quite a lot towards the bottom here at the highest rating, but it's still 60% win rate. I don't think you're going very wrong with Frost Mage in this regard. Devastation Evoker's having a good run this week, though, overall on the stats, which you can see some specs are definitely switching, even despite no class balance changes. Some specializations are starting to rise and go up, like Demonology has gone up a little bit over here in this last week as well. So I would say that the game is, more balanced than it has been in a lot of previous game states. Across broad ranges of the ladder as well, just looking at the data. Marksmanship Hunter, great beginner spec to pick up as well. A little bit hard countered by disarms and things like that, but with Rogue falling off quite a bit, you don't really have that annoyance. Monk disarm, Monk's not that popular. Warrior disarm can be annoying, but you've got tools that help you deal with Warrior a little bit better than you can with Rogues or Windwalkers. So Marksmanship Hunter, definitely a solid pick. The graph is bugged out, unfortunately, for us when we're in the mid rating here, but I still think it's a solid mid to beginning mid and probably advanced level specialization. Although when you get to the top of the ladder, win rate does start to come down a little bit, and I think that is because of line of sighting them, disarming them. Hunter had a really good week last week to get 72% at the highest part of the ladder, but down to 53% this week, so falling back into line in that regard. Marks is a really good pickup. Again, you're countered by disarms. Plate classes can be a little bit difficult, but it's still a really good specialization to go after, I think. Devastation Evoker, is at the beginning rating, it's not that popular. And I don't know if it's just because this isn't like a cool fantasy at the low rating. I feel like a lot of specs they pick based on like the fantasy almost. And then as it advances, it gets a little bit more based on throughput. Win rate is still above 50%, even as a beginner specialization. As you move through the ranks for Devastation, it's likely going to be following a similar trend where you're just holding about the same. I think that Devastation is just a solid spec, does really good damage, can struggle with multiple casters with how limited its own range is, but you can see even from bottom to top, it's a really good beginner spec, and you can definitely get some really crazy stuff done even at the highest parts of the ladder with the specialization. So definitely, if you're looking for performance, I think that Devastation Evoker is a really solid pick for ladder play, and we even saw some of it in the tournament as well. So it's not just limited to that. You can definitely get a lot of potential out of it. Ellie is one of the best ranged that you can play at the moment, beginner to advanced, although I will say Shaman has a lot of keybinds. So if you want to get away from keybinds, Shaman may not be one that you want to go for, but 50% win rate even at the beginning stages of the ladder, still holding a really solid popularity, solid win rate all throughout all of the ranks. And when you get to the top of the ladder, it's really disruptive against mages, which are really popular, and it's a solid pick into a lot of the melee classes, so it's very well-rounded, I would say, overall for Elemental. Maybe not as specialized as Frost Mage, but very well-rounded. So if you want something that's just good in almost all situations, Ellie Shaman is going to be a better, more well-rounded pick. You're going to have less volatility on, oh man, this is just a really annoying lobby, what am I going to do type of situation. Affliction Warlock still holds through the middle, but I would say as a beginner, it's going to be a rough ride with how many warriors there are, how many melee DPS there are, and you can see that at the beginning, its win rate is much lower at the start. So this is one where you're going to have to grow into it if you want to try and make it work, and you're definitely going to be battling against, I think, a lot of odds. Still really good into a lot of spellcasters, so once you can get past that initial cloud and fog of melee, you can do well, but even at the highest rating, if there are any warriors, win rate drops below 49%, and I think Warlock, very similar to Death Knight, needs just a little bit of a tweak increase against plate classes. Yeah, it drops down below 50% even at the highest rating, so even the best Warlock. So if you're an AF Warlock and you're struggling right now, this is why we're doing this type of analysis. If you're just sitting there, it's like, what's going on, man? Am I just bad at the game? I don't get why I'm not able to win. The data supports it. Even across any skill spectrum here, you're going to have a tough time with how the meta is moving for Affliction, to say the least. So don't beat yourself up too much, but the Affliction Warlocks out there are definitely doing some work. You guys are doing some work, still fighting and holding kind of like that middle ground position. Arcane has seen a surge in popularity, and I'm not surprised because it's strong and it's fun, but it is complex. But I'm interested to see, because I would expect at low ratings it has a lower win rate, but it surprisingly doesn't. I think for a lot of players, they've realized that on Arcane you can get a lot of effectiveness out of just doing Touch of the Magi, Missiles, Barrage. That will, in some cases at the lowest rating, you might even kill a player. Just 3 buttons: Touch of the Magi, Missiles, Barrage. But again, a lot of its damage is focused around casting, which can be disrupted. And it can be a lot to take into like how, you have so much mobility that using it the most effectively can actually become difficult. But its win rate is actually doing very healthy even despite that, even at the lower ends of the bracket. I think Arcane is finally starting to get the love that it deserves. So its popularity is going up a bit, but at the absolute highest level, its win rate is starting to get slapped hard. So this is a spec where I think you counter Rets, you counter Warriors, which can be really effective at the low level parts of the ladder if you figure out how to make Arcane work. But you can see that when you get to the top level of the ladder, I think Elemental Shamans and Hunters become very disruptive for you. And that's what's bringing the win rate down as you get higher rating, because this is a spec that you would expect would be the inverse, where low rated, you don't know what you're doing, you're losing a lot, and then the win rate goes up as you climb. But based on the spec representation with a lot of Ellies and Hunters at the top, the win rate actually comes down. So this is a spec where you can kind of abuse low rating if you get really good at it. You could almost consider it like a good Smurf spec if you want to have an alt and just like play it around 1800 rating and smash all the warriors and make them rage. You could do that, but obviously you're going to see some frustrations, I think, with Elemental Shamans and Hunters towards the top end. Shadow, much like Affliction, you guys are just holding on in the middle. Even at the beginning rating, still a 50% win rate. I thought that was going to be lower. I got 2400 done with my Shadow Priest. You can definitely still do a lot of good overall damage with it. I really liked playing the Mind Trauma PvP talent and stealing people's haste. That kind of scaled up where your item level is a bit. Made me feel more competitive overall. I was opting for that instead of the Psyfiend. And it's still 53% win rate, even despite kind of being maybe towards the top of the bottom of the top end, if that makes any sense when you're looking at this, right? Like Mages, Hunters, Ellies, they're getting a little bit more debut, but I think you're definitely better than Warlock. And I think the main reason for that is your survivability is just one step above it. And so Shadow is a very solid pick. Your defense is, I would say, a cut above Warlock and Boomkin, which allows you to have a chance, although it is still difficult, into things like Fury Warrior, especially with how prominent it is at the moment, but definitely still has possibilities, I think. And maybe it's just a matter of getting Warlock survivability just a tidge up, as well as Boomkin survivability a tidge up, closer to where Shadow Priest currently is. And then we got some really good things going on, right? Like a little bit of survivability for DKs, a little survivability for Warlocks and Boomkins, and I think we're going to see a big mesh as far as the meta is concerned. And Shadow does, its win rate starts to fall off a little bit more towards the top end, likely again with Fury Warriors representation. It's not as notable, although at the highest level, the best Shadow Priest in the game is pulling off still a decently high win rate, even in that. But it's going to be a bit more of a struggle, especially one that you're going to have to kind of pick up towards the low end, towards the top end. But definitely like a solid pick all around, but maybe not so friendly for beginners. Destruction Warlock coming in, middle of the pack as well. Survivability issues are going to be the main thing for you, but Chaos Bolt still hits really hard. So you could definitely probably still have a lot of fun as a beginner at some of the lower ratings and advancing through there, especially for players that just don't know what to do with Chaos Bolt. If you're just unending resolving first global and shooting on Chaos Bolts while you're immune to interrupts, could be a bit of fun because it's honestly still holding a decently solid win rate, even at these lower levels where I would expect it to kind of struggle with survivability, especially against Warriors. But win rate just all around solid, but definitely noticeable survivability. Still honestly solid all throughout, based on the data. I've got my own personal biases towards Destro. I'm going to have to play Destro a little bit more myself. I played it a little bit recently. I think I got 2400 on Affliction. It was close to finishing it on Demo, but maybe I'll give Destro another run here because its win rate is honestly surprisingly solid throughout multiple ranks. Even despite that, the weaknesses that it has, I would say, against Warriors and the like. So definitely Destruction, decent pick to go for. Mage is more specialized. I say Hunter is a little easier to pull off, but big Chaos Bolts definitely still can have a lot of fun with it, even in the current meta. Obviously, survivability buffs would be nice. Demonology brings a lot of disruption and a lot of schools of magic, which make it a little bit easier to play, I would say, into melee DPS than other Warlock specializations, but you still have the same struggle in melee lobbies when multiple melee start dogging on you and you're on a small map. There's not really a lot of places you can go. You should expect to struggle, but it does make it a little bit easier to play as a beginner because you can cast so many different schools of magic. You can cast a Fear, Bait and Interrupt, then cast Handical Dance. So you have a little bit more option. than the other Warlock specs do, and you have more stuns, so you can pin the melee and hold them down and get your cast off more successfully than the other casters, which definitely makes it a little bit easier, I would say, to play. At the moment, still holds above a 50% win rate, so just like kind of like a solid mid-tier pick, which is representative by the data, as we can see here as well, and this is true all throughout the ranks, regardless of beginner to more advanced, still holds solid win rates, and maybe honestly this is why they don't buff them. Maybe they're worried that it'll just like skyrocket them through, but I feel like it is necessary to give them a little bit, maybe not huge, just a tiny kind of physical damage mitigation increase from where they currently are. But Demonology is obviously still a really good pick. We talked about Devastation. It's really good from top to bottom, honestly. Super underrated. But Fire, and surprisingly Aug, let's talk about Aug first, because Aug is actually really good. Its win rate holds above 50% win rate. It's got a really strong one-shot. It's a complete cheese spec, but it's actually, I would say, a lot more viable than maybe the stats are leading on right now. I'd say maybe it's just not as popular. But as we get higher rating, you can see its win rate for the players who have actually decided to commit to it. Its win rate starts going up really high towards like this middle ranking, and it's one of those things where it's still kind of a new spec, just came in Dragonflight. A lot of people maybe haven't really completely mastered everything available to it, but it's a sleeper spec for sure. So I think it's one of the deceiving on the bottom next to Fire Mage here. The main reason I still think Fire Mage is at the bottom here is that Frost can just do the same damage, mostly instant casting. If not, you can almost entirely instant cast and do the same effective damage as Fire, but you have stronger snares. The disadvantage of Frost in the past is that you had to plant a lot and cast Frost bolts. You can do that. You have the option to do that, but you don't even really have to do that to do effective damage. You can kind of just flurry lance, and still be at the top of the damage meter, but you just have really strong slows, and Fire doesn't have access to that. So that's likely the reason. It's not that it's totally unplayable. I think Arcane's definitely top end burst ends up spiking higher than it. And then Frost's control is better, but you can see the win rate is actually healed up quite a lot, even though its representation is really low. And it's one of those things where Mage has 3 DPS specs. So it's like, one of them's probably not going to be as good no matter what. There's going to be a reason that the other ones are better than the others. No matter what you do, especially when you have 3 DPS specs. Same thing with Rogue. So I feel like it's a very tough thing to make all 3 specs of a class as 3 DPS specs is equally powerful in all situations as each other, especially if there are other classes or specs that don't have that aren't viable as far as like priority. But I don't even know what you could really do with Fire at that point, other than make Frost have to cast more. So Fire's niche is that it's almost all instant cast. That's the only thing, and that would bring Frost's power down at the top end, and it would bring Fire up in the middle maybe and pull them together. That's the only way that you could really achieve that. Obviously Frost Mage players don't want to hear that. Frost Mage is also really strong right now, so maybe you guys need to just get used to hearing stuff like that, but that's the only thing I could see as a resolution. When we look at healers, things are starting to even out a lot more for healers. Poor little Prez Evokers, but healers are evening out, which is exactly what needed to happen. We needed the healers to be more competitive with each other, so it doesn't feel like you queue up and you got the God healer on the other team and you're not playing the God spec, so you just lose and you feel like you can't win. So this is really good. Prez, though, you guys are still flying at the bottom. Definitely would like to see some type of buff for you, but when we look at healers, when we look at Druid, currently trending as number 1, above a 50% win rate even at the beginning stages. I think that new tree form has definitely helped you out a lot for beginners. Being able to go to the Ancient of Lore and just getting really powerful heals, being immune to CC, definitely a good way to get new Druids like off the ground and survive the opening stages of like a solo shuffle engagement. And when you get to the top end, though, it starts skyrocketing. This guy is, so we're at the absolute high end here. Resto Druid is completely dominating, and honestly Prez starts to get a lot better towards the top end, which I think would make sense because it's a very skill dependent healer. You have to aim a lot of your abilities. Short range is really punishing, so I think that does make sense there. But it's interesting how the skill level actually skews this graph so much. At the low rating, almost all the healers are basically equal, but as you get towards the top end, you get a large disparity. But that could have just been maybe one good session for one Druid, maybe, is the only thing I can really think of to try and explain that graph. Shaman has like a mid-level fall off, but I think it's just a bugged graph. Just holding solid in the middle, a little bit weaker towards the top. Still in a decent spot, though. And honestly, healer balance, I think they've done a lot better of a job than in previous patches. Usually it is just one healer dominates everything. I don't think that's 100% clear. You can pretty much go for whatever you want now. At this point, Mistweaver could likely use, I think, like a new PP talent that helps to deal with crowd control. I really like the idea of like a wind wall, like Yasuo putting a wind wall down that you can stand behind and channel your Soothing Mist, where it protects you from incoming crowd control, like a smoke bomb that line of sight's only crowd control. I think something like that could go a long way for helping Mistweaver deal with those situations that are kind of tough to deal with. Almost like a casting circle, but it's a wall that blocks crowd control that you can walk through, obviously. But you wouldn't be able to cast CC through, something like that. Preservation, I think it's likely just going to need a little bit more throughput, given that its inherent weakness of having to be so close to the engagement, stacking up, getting cleaved, CC'd really easily. I think it's also one of the healers that was hit the hardest by crowd control thresholds going up, so it takes more damage to break crowd control, because Prez's way to outplay crowd control is just, I'm going to stand on top of the guy getting attacked, so it breaks, and now it doesn't always break. So maybe taking it a step further, I don't know if they can individually tune this based on spec, but like maybe lowering the damage threshold for preservation, so CC is more likely to break to AoE damage on a Prez Evoker than other healers, because they have to stack. It's part of their mechanics. Could be something to possibly consider. As far as like overall meta design decisions, it's obvious that I think like a lot of melee cleaves are not that viable. Like Ret Warrior, I don't even consider Ret melee a melee cleave, because Rets are pseudo ranged and can play the game not entirely stacked on their melee if they want to. But melee cleaves that have to stand stacked on each other are not viable, and it's because there's so much AoE damage. So increasing some sort of modifier like avoidance in PvP, so AoE damage on melee DPS is lower, so they're not just AoE exploding, could definitely help alleviate that issue with melee not really being as powerful together. Although in Shuffle, I don't really know if they have that issue, but especially in 3v3, you'll notice that issue with melee DPS. And then ranged have the issue of not having Mortal Strike to reduce healing. So if they're fighting a class that can reduce healing, you're kind of in a position where you can't really do a lot with double range. Those are kind of the two main issues as far as archetypes of comp with double melee and double range. If you're considering something for 3 versus 3, generally speaking, you're going to need a melee that has a Mortal Strike with some of the strongest ranged options, and depending on the synergies of the crowd controls that they have will determine those types of pairings. But as far as solo shuffle, I think it's honestly in a pretty solid spot for overall representation, right? We got Fire Mage, Enhanced, Survival Hunter. Those guys are definitely lagging a bit behind. DKs and Warlocks, and I think even Boomkins, which I somehow skipped my own spec. Did I do that? Is this conspiracy theory? So Boomkin towards the lower level of the ladder, above 50% win rate. As you guys progress through the ladder, we'll just jump to the middle one here for this. Still holding above 50% win rate. I think Boomkin is actually a lot better than it was. Still going to have some troubles, I think, at the beginning level of surviving. I've got guides on this channel on how to survive on a Boomkin if you want some help and advice on how to deal with that. But it's got a really good burst element, and I think as we're getting more stats, especially with the turbo boost that's coming in, that item level boost could definitely shift up things in the meta. So if you want to stay up to date with how things are going, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Your support's greatly appreciated. But those are kind of my thoughts. I think the game overall, as far as gameplay, it's getting really solid. Some stuff is maybe a bit erroneous. I think the shield shattering, which I'm spacing out on the name from Warriors, where they can crack absorb shields at hitting over 6 million damage. It's kind of like, I get it's supposed to break the shields, but it's like, it's really high. It's like a really high amount of damage. Maybe that needs to be brought down a little bit as far as melee. And as far as Rets, it's like they do have, I think Arcane is a counter, but they just need more specs in the archetype of Arcane. Maybe we'll see this graph actually shift, is because we saw Arcane going up, right? So as Arcane goes up, I think likely Ret will come down a little bit, but we have to wait and see more. And maybe when Conquest unlocks and players can make more alts more freely, maybe that ends up being the case. The graphics ends up evening itself out. But I would say that if you're like interested in trying, it's absolutely not a bad time to try PvP as far as gameplay is concerned. You can play a lot of things. There's a lot of variety, a lot of options. So other than that, thank you guys very much for tuning into the video. Hope you guys enjoyed the insights, and I will see you in the next one.